Welcome and Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah. And we are doing this lesson Le'ilui Nishmata of Naomi Siemens Hellman Goren, mother of Judith Hellman. And may her memory be a blessing. And also Le'ilui Nishmata of Barbara Radinsky, wife of Harlan Radinsky, whose yahrzeit starts this evening. And we're going to go ahead and do that. All right, and I'm going to go to the screen share now. Let's see how this works out. Yep. You can see the screen. Okay. So remember, we're having this intense revelation that Abram at this point, right, still Abram, is having with God, and how God is, how he's telling God how he is concerned about not having a child, how God has assured him that he will have a child, and not only that, but his seed will be like the stars of the heaven. And then he tells him that his offspring will in fact inherit this land on which he is now sojourning. And God tells him to take various animals and to divide them in half, and that's what is going to happen right now. That's where we're at with verse 10. Vayikachlo et kol ele, and he took all of these, Abram took all of these, vayvater otam, and he cut them in half, placed them in half, batavech, right down the middle. Vayiten ish bitro, and he placed each one's section, likrat re'ehu, opposite its other section. So he divided them in half and then placed one half opposite the other half. Ve'etatzipor lovatar. However, with regard to the birds, he'd been told to take a turtle dove and a pigeon. He did not divide those. And again, there's a lot of explaining to be done in this. Let's take a look at it. Right. Vayvater otam, and he divided them. Chalak kol echad lishnei chalakim. He divided each one into two parts. And this is the straightforward meaning of the text. Lefi, and why? Because keshaya koret brit imo, right? Because in creating this covenant, right, in setting up this covenant with him, lishmor haftachto, this was to secure, you might say, his promise, right? To guard his promise, lohorish levanav, to give as an inheritance to his offspring, et haaretz, the land. So this was kidichtiv, as it states, Bayom hahu, on that day, karat Hashem et Avram brit. God, this karat means to literally cut, and that has to do with cutting of the animals, and with Abram a covenant, lemor, saying, etc., etc. That's a verse we're going to come up to in a little bit. And again, in explaining the plain, straightforward meaning of this verse, the derech kortei brit, and it was the practice of those who were establishing a covenant, who were setting up a covenant, a solemn oath to one another, the chalek behema, to split up an animal, to divide up an animal, ula avor bein bitreha or betareha, and to walk between those parts. In other words, it's like by your life, you are committing to do this particular thing. Kamash nemar lahalan, as is stated later on in the Tanakh, in the Bible, in Jeremiah 34, ha'ovrim bein bitrei ha'egel, the ones who walked or passed between the parts of the calf. Afkan, here too, Tanur Ashan, we see that a flame of fire, or smoke, a flame, or a pillar, excuse me, I'm called although tanur is sort of has more the meaning to do with an oven, right? So ashan would be smoke, velapid a torch of fire. They asher avar bein hagzarim. They passed between these parts of the animals. He shlucho shel shchina. This was the emissary of the divine presence, shehu esh, which is fire. Fire is considered an emissary of Hashem. Excuse me, 1 second. Okay. Ve'et hatzipor lo batar, and it mentions why the specific of the bird which he did not divide in half, he didn't split it. Lefi shahumot of de kochavim, because when it comes to the nations of the idolaters, nimshalu paparim, they are described as bulls, ve'elim, and rams, u'seirim, and goats, shine'emar, as it states. So he's going to quote in Psalm 22, Sovavuni, parim rabim. Many bulls have surrounded me. And in that psalm, he's talking about his enemies, enemy nations. So these nations are considered to be, there's the symbolism of symbolized by various animals. The Omer, and another part to support this idea in the book of Daniel, looks like chapter 8, Ha'ayel asher ra'ita, the ram which you saw. In other words, these visions that were seen, what did the ram symbolize? Baal HaKornaim, with the horns, Malchem Adai Ufaras. There it says, specifically it interprets the dream and says, those are the kings of Media, and Persia. Omer Hatzafir, and it says the buck, the Hasair, and the goat, Melech Yavan. They represent the king of Greece. The Israel, with regards to Israel, Nimshalu Livnei Yonah. They are compared or described of as doves. Shene'emar, as it says, Shir Hashirim Bet, the Song of Songs, chapter 2, Yonati, my dove, Bechagvei Hasela, is in the clefts of the rock. Lefichach, and for this reason, Batar HaBehemot, he divided the cattle, Remez, to allude al Ovdei Kochavim, regarding idolaters, Sheyu Kalin Vehochin, that they would continually grow weaker and decrease in number. The Atatzipor lo batar, but he did not divide up the bird. Remez, this was an allusion, Sheyu Yisrael Kayamim Le'olam, that the Jewish people, Israel, would exist forever. So remember that Rashi had said that Abraham had asked God on what merit would the Israelites retain the land of Israel. And at that point, he had said, on the basis of the korbanot, on the basis of the sacrifices. And here we are talking, in a sense, of animals that are being sacrificed for the sake of this covenant. So in a way, that's being supported here. And if we wanted to possibly take it further, to talk about the fact that to act in a way, again, the word korban is related to the word karev, which means to draw near, that the idea of the Jewish people drawing near to God in a way that they could only do in the land of Israel, which they could not do to that degree elsewhere. And that sort of raises an interesting question as to how we ought to behave given that we have the land of Israel. I realize, of course, that on a practical level, rebuilding the temple is not a practical suggestion at this point. My sense is, even though there is, in a sense, a thought of a third temple being built, my own feeling is that that temple will only be rebuilt on a foundation of peace among the nations. And the fact is, of course, that the nations such as the Muslims and the Christians are not idolaters. They do all believe in one transcendent God. So, going on, verse 11. Vayerid ha'ayat, and the bird of prey. I think also that an ayat describes a hawk, al hapigarim. The bird of prey came down on the carcasses. Vayashev utam Avraham, and Avram, excuse me. I want to be careful there. And Abram shooed them away. That's the way we'd say it. What is interesting, though, is it doesn't say only on the birds, right? It is, I believe, it is referring to all of them. And the fact that Abram shooed away the birds of prey that wanted to, devour the carcasses, is interesting as to what might that significance of the fact that Abram, it doesn't say he just shoot away the birds of prey from the doves or the pigeons. It's about all the carcasses, right? So what is that suggesting to us if these animals represent other nations? So I'll leave that as a question. Ha'ayit, the bird of prey. Who off? So this word ayit is an unusual word, and Rashi wants to help us with it. Who off? It is a type of bird. The al shem shehu at v'shoef et hanevelot, and the fact that it's called an ayat because it is urgent and swoops down on carcasses. Latush alei ochel, to dart on the food. And he gives an example in Samuel, first book of Samuel, chapter 15, Vata'at el hashlal, and it pounced upon the booty. Okay, so this ayat has to do with pouncing on of some kind. Well, in this case, with a bird swooping down on. Al hapegarim. So the word pegar has to do with carcass, and it is also something that there's something sort of disgusting about a carcass. So the pegarim refer to the bitarim, these pieces of the animals. And he says, Farim acherim, there are manuscripts or versions of Rashi, ha-pegarim, that it translates metargaminan, that we in the Rashi, he goes on to say that the word pegarim, metargaminan piglaya, that it needs to be translated as piglaya. And that's because a resh and a lamed are changeable from Aramaic into Hebrew. Ella, mitoch shehu galu letargem. Okay, but he says they were used to translating ish bitro, right? Because it's talking about the one to its companion, or its other side, the other half of it. Vayahav pilgaya, right? He placed pilgaya. So you notice the transposition of the gimel and the lamed, right? We have piglaya, which refers to the carcasses, and we've got pilgaya, that comes from the word paleg, which means to divide. Nitchalef lahem tevat piglaya lefilgaya. He says they transposed the word piglaya into pilgaya. V'targumo hapegarim, and he translates into Aramaic. There are versions, I guess, that translate the word pegarim to pilgaya, to the house, but he says v'chol hametargem chen to'eh, and anyone who translates in this way is making a mistake. Lefi she'ein lahakish betarim lepegarim, because you really can't understand betarim, pieces, right? Lepegarim, to carcasses. A piece is not a carcass. Shebetarim targomo pilgaya, because the word betarim has the correct translation of paleg, to divide. Pigarim, and carcasses, targumo piglaya. Then you can say the Aramaic translation is piglaya, lashon pigul, which has to do with the association of the word pagul, kamo, and we have this word actually in Hebrew later on in the book of Leviticus. It refers to a sacrifice where if the priest intended when he made the sacrifice to eat it past its prescribed time, sacrifices had to be consumed within a specific amount of time. It varied depending on the sacrifice, but if the priest, when he made the sacrifice, intended to eat it outside of it, the sacrifice is considered pigul. It's unacceptable, and in fact, the transgression for consuming it beyond its time is karet, is a serious divine punishment. So he says, kamo pigulhu, when it says in Leviticus chapter 7 that particular sacrifice is pigul. In other words, no longer is it a sacrifice, it's more of a carcass, simply something that has the association of being disgusting. Lashon peger, right? It's got the same understanding as the word peger. Kach shamati mipi Rabbeinu. This is interesting, right? That he says, this is what I learned at the mouth of Rabbeinu, our rabbi, Yehuda Berebi Shmuel. So he mentions, again, one of his teachers. V'chein hagisa, and there's a lot of editorializing in this particular Rashi. It says, and this is in fact the version of the text Barashi Kitvei Yad in Rashi manuscripts. Kitvei Yad is a manuscript. Uvichitvei Yad Acheret, but in a different manuscript, because there are various manuscripts that have survived. Kativ Kach Piresh, there's a different version. It says, this is what Rabbeinu Meir Berebi Shmuel. It's a different rabbi. Instead of Rabbi Yehuda, it says Rabbi Meir, our Rabbi Meir, the son of Shmuel. Vayashov. Let me make sure I have the word correctly here. No, Vayashev. Sorry, Vayashev. And I was pronouncing it from a different root. Vayashev. He says the word Vayashev, Lashon Nishiva, that it has the meaning of sort of blowing, right? Uvahafracha, and flying away. So in other words, he shooed away, I think would be a good way of translating this. Ukamo, and he says, example in Psalm 147, Yashev Rucho, he causes his wind to blow. Remes, and what was this? What was the symbolism here? Sheyavo David ben Ishai, that David, son of Jesse, would come, lachalotam, to try and bring them to an end. In other words, to finish off the idolatry, the idolatrous nations. The ein manichinoto, but they do not allow him to do that. That would be the act of Abram shooing away these birds. Min hashamayim, that the divine instruction would prevent him, would not allow him to do this, ad shiavo melech HaMashiach, until the King Messiah would in fact come. That these other nations are going to continue to exist until Messianic time. And with this, I am going to conclude today's lesson. So we'll take a look at Mark the Place. This is a really significant passage. It really is. As you can see, there's a lot to it. And mark that there, mark the page, and I'm going to stop the share. And if there are any comments, I'm happy to take them if you like. Otherwise, we will stop the lesson. Okay? Thank you.